The train whistle screamed through the afternoon heat of Buffalo, Wyoming, announcing its arrival with a plume of black smoke that curled against the endless blue sky. And Victoria Reynolds stood on the platform clutching her handkerchief so tightly her knuckles had gone white, trying not to think about the fact that she was a 24-year-old widow arriving in a town where she knew absolutely no one. The year was 1882, and the world had changed so much in the 6 months since her husband Thomas had died from pneumonia back in Philadelphia. The city had felt suffocating after his death, every corner reminding her of their brief 2 years of marriage, every face offering the same pitying looks that made her want to scream. When the letter arrived from Thomas's uncle mentioning land he owned in Wyoming territory, suggesting she might make a fresh start out west, Victoria had made her decision within a day. She sold everything that wouldn't fit in a wagon, packed up the furniture Thomas had so lovingly crafted with his own hands, and bought a one-way ticket west. Now, stepping down onto the wooden platform with dust swirling around her black morning dress, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Buffalo was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings that looked like they might blow away in a strong wind, scattered along a main street that was nothing but packed dirt. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing, and the sky seemed bigger here than it ever had back east, stretching on forever in every direction. Mrs. Reynolds, a thin man with spectacles and a nervous disposition, approached her, removing his hat. "I'm Gerald Morrison, the station master. Your telegram said you would be arriving today with freight." "Yes," Victoria said, grateful her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "A wagon full of furniture. It should be in the freight car." "A whole wagon full," Morrison's eyebrows rose. "That is quite a bit of freight, madam. We will need to unload it, and then you will need transport to wherever you are heading." Victoria had already thought of this, though the logistics had seemed simpler when she was planning everything from Philadelphia. "I was told there might be someone in town who could help with heavy hauling. And I have the deed to a property about 5 miles west of town. A cabin, I believe, with some land." "The old Thornton place," Morrison said, nodding. "Yes, I know it. Been empty about a year now since old Walter passed. Your husband's kin was he, his uncle. We never met, but he left the property to Thomas, and now it comes to me." Morrison looked like he wanted to say something about a woman alone on a frontier property, but wisely kept his thoughts to himself. "Well, let me see about getting your freight unloaded. There are a few fellows in town who do hauling work. The wagon itself came with the shipment, I assume." "Yes, everything is loaded and ready. I just need someone to help me transport it." What Victoria did not mention was that she had exactly $43 remaining to her name, and she was praying that the cabin was in livable condition because she had no backup plan. The jewelry she had sold had paid for the train ticket and freight charges. The rest of her small savings would have to stretch until she could figure out how to make a living out here. Thomas had taught her bookkeeping, and she could sew well enough. Surely, a frontier town needed such skills. The freight car was opened, and Victoria's heart clenched seeing the wagon sitting there, piled high with furniture covered in canvas tarps. Every piece represented a memory. The dining table where she and Thomas had shared their meals. The rocking chair his mother had given them as a wedding present. The chest of drawers he had spent 3 months perfecting, getting every dovetail joint just right. She had not been able to leave any of it behind. Morrison arranged for several men to help push the wagon down a ramp and onto the street, where it sat looking impossibly large and out of place. The wagon itself was sturdy, made to handle rough roads, and Victoria was grateful Thomas's practical nature had led him to build it so well years ago when they had first talked about maybe, someday, heading west for adventure. That dream had died with him, but now here she was, living it alone. "You are going to need a strong team to pull that load 5 miles, Morrison said, examining the wagon with a doubtful expression. "And someone who knows the roads. It has been a dry summer, but there are still rough patches, and if you are not careful, you could lose a wheel or worse." "Is there someone you would recommend?" Victoria asked, trying not to let desperation creep into her voice. "Well, there is Henry Turner. He has got a ranch about 3 miles west of town, runs cattle, does some hauling work on the side, and he has got good horses. He is in town today, actually. I saw him heading into the general store about 20 minutes ago." Relief flooded through Victoria. "Could you direct me there?" Morrison pointed down the main street. "3 buildings down on the left. Cannot miss it. Just tell him Morrison sent you and that you need hauling work done." Victoria thanked him and made her way down the street, very aware of the eyes watching her. A woman in full morning dress was clearly unusual in Buffalo, and she could feel the weight of curiosity from every person she passed. The wooden sidewalk creaked under her boots, and she kept her eyes forward, trying to project more confidence than she felt. The general store was larger than the other buildings, with a painted sign that read "Sullivan's Mercantile" hanging above the door. Victoria stepped inside, grateful to escape the intense sunshine. The interior was dimly lit and crammed with goods, everything from farming equipment to bolts of fabric to barrels of flour. A woman behind the counter looked up with interest. "Help you, miss? I am looking for Henry Turner." "I was told he might be here. Out back, loading supplies into his wagon." The woman gestured toward a rear door. "Just go on through." Victoria walked through the store, weaving between displays, and pushed open the back door into a loading area where a wagon stood surrounded by crates and sacks. A man was lifting a 100-pound sack of grain like it weighed nothing, his back to her, and even through his dusty work shirt Victoria could see the breadth of his shoulders, the easy strength in how he moved. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Henry Turner?" He turned, and Victoria found herself looking into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. Henry Turner was perhaps 27 or 28, tall and lean with the kind of build that came from hard physical work, not leisure. His face was tanned and weathered from sun and wind, with strong features and dark brown hair that needed a trim. He wore dusty denim pants, scuffed boots, and a shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscled forearms. A bandana hung around his neck, and he had a hat pushed back on his head. "I am," he said, his voice a deep rumble. He set down the grain sack and wiped his hands on his pants. "What can I do for you, madam? My name is Victoria Reynolds. I just arrived on the train, and I have a wagon full of furniture that needs to be transported to the old Thornton property. The station master said you might be available for hauling work." Henry's gaze sharpened with interest, taking in her morning dress, her obvious Eastern origin, the determined set of her jaw despite the nervousness in her eyes. "The Thornton place, that is about 5 miles west." "And you said a wagon full of furniture." "Yes. It is sitting at the train station now. I can pay for your time and labor." Henry walked closer, and Victoria had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. He was even taller up close, probably 6'2", and there was something about his direct gaze that made her feel both nervous and strangely safe at the same time. "A wagon full of furniture," he repeated slowly, and something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "Looks like you plan to stay forever." The words hit Victoria harder than they should have. "I have nowhere else to go," she said quietly, honestly. "So yes, I suppose I do plan to stay." The amusement faded from Henry's expression, replaced by something more thoughtful. "I did not mean any offense, madam. It is just unusual to see someone arrive with that much freight. Most folks come west with just what they can carry. Most folks probably have better options than I do." Victoria lifted her chin. "Will you help me or not? I can pay $3 for the hauling and your time." $3 was more than the job was probably worth, but Victoria needed to make sure he said yes. Henry seemed to sense her desperation because his expression softened. "Let me finish loading here and I will meet you at the station in 15 minutes. I will take a look at what you have got and figure out the best way to transport it. Might need to make 2 trips, depending on the weight. Thank you." The relief in Victoria's voice was palpable. "Truly." "Thank you." Henry nodded and watched as she turned and walked back into the store, her black skirt swishing around her ankles. When she was gone, he let out a long breath and shook his head. A widow, clearly, and young to have already lost a husband. Coming to Buffalo alone with nothing but furniture and determination. That took either courage or foolishness, and Henry suspected it might be a bit of both. He finished loading his own supplies quickly and drove his wagon to the station, where he found Victoria standing next to a heavily loaded freight wagon that made him whistle low under his breath. She had not been exaggerating. Every inch of space was packed with furniture, all of it carefully wrapped and tied down. "This is all quality work," Henry said, running his hand along the edge of a chest of drawers visible under the tarp. "Someone knew what they were doing when they built these pieces. My husband." Victoria's voice was soft. "He was a carpenter in Philadelphia. These were for our home." Henry glanced at her morning dress and understood. "I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Victoria clasped her hands in front of her. "Can you transport it all?" Henry walked around the wagon, assessing the weight distribution, the condition of the wheels, the strength of the axles. "This is well packed. Whoever loaded it knew what they were doing. The wagon itself is solid. I have got 2 draft horses that can handle this load no problem. But those 5 miles are going to be rough. The road out to the Thornton place is not exactly smooth. I understand. I just need everything to arrive intact. Then we will take it slow and careful." Henry looked at the sun, calculating the time. "If we start now, we should make it before dark." "Have you seen the cabin yet?" Victoria shook her head. "I only have the deed and a description from a lawyer's letter. It is supposed to be a 2-room cabin with a well and a small barn." "It is more than that," Henry said. "I knew Walter Thornton. He was a good man, kept his property in decent shape. The cabin is solid and there is about 40 acres of land, some of it wooded, some open pasture. He ran a few head of cattle before he got too old to manage it." This was more information than Victoria had received from any letter, and she seized on it gratefully. "Is the cabin livable?" "Should be. It has been empty a year, so there will be dust and probably some mice, but the structure is sound. Walter built it himself 30 years ago, meant it to last." Victoria felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. At least she would have a roof over her head tonight. "Then we should get started." Henry hitched his 2 massive draft horses to Victoria's wagon, speaking to them in a low, calm voice as he worked. The horses were beautifully maintained, their coats gleaming, clearly well cared for. When everything was secured, Henry helped Victoria up onto the wagon seat, his hand warm and strong as he supported her elbow. "You ever driven a wagon before?" he asked. "No, I have barely been in one before." "Then hold on tight. The road gets bumpy." Henry swung up beside her and took the reins in his capable hands. With a click of his tongue and a gentle snap of the reins, the horses started forward, and the wagon lurched into motion. Buffalo fell away behind them as they headed west. the town giving way to open grassland that stretched in every direction, broken occasionally by clusters of cottonwood trees and the dark shapes of distant cattle. The sky was impossibly vast, and the silence was profound, broken only by the creak of the wagon wheels, the jingle of the harness, and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. Victoria had never experienced space like this. In Philadelphia, there had always been buildings, people, noise, the constant press of the city. Here, the emptiness felt almost overwhelming, and yet there was something beautiful about it too, something that made her chest ache with an emotion she could not quite name. "It is a lot to take in," Henry said, as if reading her thoughts. "The land out here. First time I saw it, I was 18 years old, fresh off the train from Missouri, and I could not believe how big everything was. Took me weeks to get used to it. How long have you been in Wyoming?" Victoria asked, grateful for the distraction of conversation. 9 years now. Came out in '73 with my father and my younger brother. My mother had died the year before, and my father wanted a fresh start. We bought land and started building a ranch from nothing. It was hard work, but good work. "And your father and brother, are they still ranching with you?" Henry's expression clouded. "My brother, yes. My father died 5 years ago, threw a horse and broke his neck. It happened fast, at least. He did not suffer." "I am sorry." Victoria knew those words were inadequate, but what else could be said? It must have been very hard. It was. But you keep going because that is what you do. Life out here does not give you much choice. You work or you starve, pretty much. They rode in silence for a while, and Victoria found herself very aware of Henry's presence beside her. He handled the horses with easy competence, his body relaxed despite the rough road, occasionally pointing out landmarks as they passed. A distinctive rock formation. A stand of trees where deer often gathered, the boundary marker of his own ranch property. "We are neighbors, then," Victoria said. "Your land is near the Thornton place, borders it on the eastern edge. My ranch house is about 2 miles from your cabin. Close enough to help if you need anything, far enough to give you privacy." The idea that she would have a neighbor relatively nearby was comforting. Victoria had been trying not to think too hard about what it would mean to be a woman alone on an isolated property, but the fear had been lurking in the back of her mind. "Do many people live out this way?" she asked. "A few scattered ranches. The Crawfords about 4 miles north, running sheep. The Hallorans 5 miles south with cattle. And there is an old trapper named Pete who lives up in the foothills, keeps to himself mostly. So you would not be completely isolated, but it is not exactly a bustling community either." Victoria absorbed this information, trying to picture her new life. "And do people come into Buffalo often?" "Once a week, usually for supplies and mail. There is a church service on Sundays, and the Mercantile is the social center, such as it is. People are friendly enough once they get to know you." The road roughened as they left the main track, following what was little more than a pair of wheel ruts through the grass. The wagon jolted and swayed, and Victoria gripped the seat, praying the furniture was as securely tied as it appeared. Henry slowed the horses to a walk, picking his way carefully around the worst of the bumps and holes. "Not much farther now," he said. "See those trees up ahead? That is the beginning of your property." Victoria's heart began to pound as they approached a grove of cottonwoods. Through the trees, she caught her first glimpse of the cabin, a low structure made of logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. It looked solid and well built, exactly as Henry had described. And as they drew closer, she could see the barn behind it, smaller than she had imagined but intact, and beyond that, the land rolling away in gentle hills. Henry pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin, set the brake, and jumped down. He tied the horses and then came around to help Victoria down, his hands spanning her waist as he lifted her easily to the ground. For a moment, they stood very close, and Victoria was aware of the warmth radiating from his body, the smell of sun-warmed cotton and leather and something else, something essentially male that made her breath catch. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reynolds," Henry said quietly, and then he stepped back, giving her space. Victoria walked toward the cabin on shaky legs, climbed the 2 steps to the porch and pushed open the door. It was not locked. Out here, Henry had told her during the ride, most people did not bother with locks. The interior was dim and dusty, but as her eyes adjusted, she saw exactly what she needed. 2 rooms, as promised. The main room held a stone fireplace, empty shelves, windows on 2 walls that would provide good light. The second room, visible through an open doorway, was smaller, meant for sleeping. The floors were wide wooden planks, solid under her feet. The walls were chinked tight, no visible gaps. It was empty and dusty and needed a thorough cleaning, but it was hers. The first place that had been truly hers since Thomas died. Victoria felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of fear and grief that had been choking her for months. She walked back outside to find Henry already untying the tarps covering the furniture. "What do you think?" he asked. "It is perfect," Victoria said, and meant it. They spent the next 2 hours unloading the wagon, and Victoria was grateful that Henry seemed to understand, without being told, that the placement of each piece mattered. He let her direct where everything should go, carrying heavy furniture with apparent ease, maneuvering the dining table through the doorway, positioning the chest of drawers against the bedroom wall, setting the rocking chair near the fireplace. As the cabin filled with furniture, it began to feel like a home. Victoria unwrapped each piece carefully, revealing the beautiful craftsmanship Thomas had poured into his work. Henry noticed too, running his hand appreciatively over the smooth finish of a side table. "Your husband was a real craftsman," he said. "These joints are perfect. You could pass these pieces down for generations." That is what he always said. Victoria's voice caught slightly. He loved working with wood, said it was the only time he felt completely at peace. Henry looked at her, saw the grief still raw in her eyes despite the months that had passed, and felt something shift in his chest. He had noticed when he first saw her that Victoria Reynolds was beautiful, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, hazel eyes that seemed to see right through a person, and fine features that belonged on a cameo. But it was more than that. There was a strength in her, a determination that showed in the set of her shoulders, the way she had traveled all this way alone, the way she was clearly preparing to build a new life from nothing. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," Henry said abruptly, surprising himself. He never talked about Catherine. Childbirth, the baby did not make it either. Victoria's eyes filled with quick sympathy. "I am so sorry, that must have been terrible. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me." Henry set down the box he was holding and leaned against the table. "We had only been married a year. I thought I had my whole life planned out, and then in one night it was all gone. I did not think I would survive it. But you did." "I did. Because like I said, life out here does not give you much choice. The ranch needed running, my brother needed me, and the work had to get done. So I got up every morning and did what needed doing, and eventually the worst of the pain faded. It is still there, but it does not rule me anymore." Victoria understood exactly what he meant. "Sometimes I forget for whole minutes at a time that Thomas is gone, and then I remember and feel guilty for forgetting. That is normal, and it gets easier. Not better, maybe, but easier." They looked at each other across the increasingly furnished cabin, 2 people who had loved and lost, who understood the particular weight of widowhood, the strange guilt of continuing to live when someone you loved could not. It created a connection between them, subtle but real. The last piece to come off the wagon was a large framed mirror that had hung in the hallway of Victoria's Philadelphia home. Henry carried it carefully, and they decided to hang it on the wall opposite the fireplace, where it would reflect light and make the room feel larger. Henry had tools in his wagon, and he found a sturdy hook, measured carefully, and hammered it into the log wall. When the mirror was hung, Victoria stepped back and saw her reflection, slightly dusty and tired but also somehow more alive than she had felt in months. "Thank you," she said. "For all of this, I could never have managed alone. It was my pleasure." Henry gathered his tools. "Now about payment. You mentioned $3, but that was before you knew how much work it would be. I am only going to take $2, and that is final." "But $2, Mrs. Reynolds." "I am not going to argue about it." Victoria realized he was giving her a kindness, leaving her with an extra dollar that might mean the difference between eating and not eating in a week or two. She reached into her bag and counted out $2 in coins, pressing them into his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Turner. Henry, out here we do not stand much on formality, and I will call you Victoria if that is all right." "It is all right." She found herself smiling for the first time since arriving in Wyoming. "Henry." He smiled back, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, less weathered. "There is a well around the side of the cabin with good water. The barn has some old hay in the loft, probably full of mice, but the structure is sound if you decide to get any animals. The privy is out back, and it looked in decent shape when I checked earlier. You have enough firewood stacked to get you through a few weeks, but you will want to lay in more before winter." Winter. Victoria had not thought that far ahead. It comes early and hard up here. "You will want to be prepared, but that is months away yet. For now, you should focus on getting settled, meeting the neighbors, figuring out how to make a living." "I can do bookkeeping and sewing. I thought I might offer my services in town." Henry nodded thoughtfully. "The mercantile owner, Sullivan, his wife is not great with the books. She might appreciate help, and there is always mending needed. Cowboys are hard on their clothes." "Then I will speak with her next time I am in town." "When are you planning to go back?" Henry asked. "I suppose in a few days, once I have gotten the cabin clean and organized. I am going in the day after tomorrow for supplies. I could stop by and give you a ride if you want company. Save you the walk." Victoria realized she had not even thought about how she would get back to town. Walking 5 miles was certainly possible, but it would take most of a day there and back. "That would be very kind, thank you." "Not kind, neighborly. That is how things work out here. We help each other because we have to." Henry climbed back up onto his wagon, released the brake, and gathered the reins. "I will see you day after tomorrow around mid-morning. And Victoria, if you need anything before then, anything at all, my place is due east about 2 miles. Just follow the main road. You cannot miss it." "I will remember. Thank you again, Henry." He tipped his hat to her and drove away, the empty wagon rattling behind the horses. Victoria watched until he disappeared behind the trees, and then she turned back to survey her new home. The sun was getting low, painting everything gold, and shadows were lengthening across the land. She had so much to do. Clean, organize, figure out how to light the lamps, get water from the well, prepare something to eat from the meager supplies she had brought. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, Victoria felt something close to hope. She had made it. Against all odds, despite her fear and grief, she had traveled halfway across the country and arrived at a place that could become home. And she had met someone kind, someone who understood loss, someone whose blue eyes seemed to see past her morning dress to the woman underneath. It was too soon to call it attraction. Victoria was still in mourning, still wearing black, still waking up some mornings and reaching for Thomas before remembering he was gone. But there had been a moment, when Henry had lifted her down from the wagon and their eyes had met, when she had felt something flicker to life inside her. Not love, nothing so strong or simple, but the recognition that maybe, someday, she might be able to feel that way again. For now, it was enough to have a home and a neighbor and the promise of a future that held more than just grief. Victoria rolled up her sleeves, found the bucket she had packed, and went to the well to draw water. There was work to be done, and work had saved her before. It would save her again. Henry drove back to his ranch in the gathering dusk, his mind full of thoughts of the widow Victoria Reynolds. He had not expected to feel anything when Morrison had mentioned a woman needing hauling help. It had just been a job, a way to earn a few dollars and help someone out. But seeing her standing there in her morning dress, so clearly trying to be brave despite being terrified, had stirred something in him. And then spending those hours working together, furnishing her cabin, talking about loss and grief, had created an unexpected intimacy. Henry had not talked about Catherine with anyone in years. His brother knew better than to bring her up. But with Victoria, it had felt natural, necessary even, to share that part of himself. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was an intelligence in her eyes, a determination in the set of her jaw, a strength that had carried her across the country alone. She would need that strength to survive out here. Frontier life was hard on everyone, but it was especially hard on women. The isolation, the endless work, the lack of amenities that Eastern women took for granted. Henry had seen more than one woman arrive full of hope and leave within months, broken by the reality of Western living. But something told him Victoria was different. She had already lost everything once and rebuilt herself enough to make this journey. She was a survivor. His ranch house came into view, a larger structure than Victoria's cabin, built by his father and expanded by Henry over the years. Smoke rose from the chimney, meaning his brother had started a fire for dinner. Henry stabled the horses, giving them extra oats and a good rub-down, and then headed inside. Jake Turner looked up from the stove where he was frying bacon. At 25, Jake was 2 years younger than Henry, shorter and stockier, with the same blue eyes but lighter hair. Where Henry was serious and measured, Jake was quick to laugh and quicker to speak his mind. "You are late," Jake said. "I was about to send out a search party." Got hired for a hauling job. The new owner of the Thornton place arrived today. Old Walter's kin. I heard someone had inherited. What are they like? Henry hung his hat on a peg and washed his hands in the basin. Not they, she. A widow from Philadelphia, about 24 years old, arrived with a wagon full of furniture. Jake's eyebrows shot up. A woman, alone. Her husband died about 6 months ago. She inherited the property from his uncle and decided to come west. That takes guts. Jake flipped the bacon. What is she like? Henry considered the question. Smart, determined, sad but trying not to show it. She's going to have a hard time out here. You planning to help her? There was something knowing in Jake's voice. I am planning to be a good neighbor, same as I would for anyone. Uh-huh. Jake grinned. Is she pretty, Jake? That is a yes. Henry, you have not looked twice at a woman since Catherine died. If this widow has caught your attention, that is a good thing. She just arrived. She is in mourning. I am not saying court her tomorrow. I am saying maybe, eventually, when enough time has passed, you might consider the fact that you are 27 years old and living like a monk. Henry scowled. I am not discussing this with you. But later, lying in his bed with the window open to the cool night air, Henry found himself thinking about Victoria anyway. The way her hair had escaped from its bun in soft tendrils around her face. the way she had touched each piece of furniture like it was precious. The way her eyes had lit up when she had first seen the cabin, hope breaking through the weariness. Jake was right about one thing. Henry had not felt attracted to anyone since Catherine died. There had been a few women in town who had made their interest clear, widows and unmarried women alike, but Henry had not been able to work up any enthusiasm. The grief had been too fresh, and then when it faded, the habit of solitude had set in. But Victoria had stirred something in him, some long dormant part of his heart that recognized in her a kindred spirit, someone who understood loss, someone who was trying to build a new life from the ruins of the old one, someone strong enough to match him. It was too soon, much too soon. But Henry found himself looking forward to the day after tomorrow, when he would drive Victoria into town. And that anticipation was more than he had felt about anything in a very long time. Victoria spent the next day and a half transforming the cabin into a livable space. She swept and scrubbed, washing every surface with water from the well until her hands were raw and her back ached. She found mouse droppings and spider webs and dust thick enough to write her name in, but underneath the neglect, the cabin was exactly as Henry had promised. Solid and well built. She arranged her furniture with care, creating spaces that felt both functional and homey. The dining table near the window where the light was best. The rocking chair angled toward the fireplace. Her bed, the one she had shared with Thomas, positioned in the smaller room where she could see out the window to the eastern hills. In her trunk, she found the linens she had packed, the quilts her mother had made, the few precious books she had not been able to leave behind. As she unpacked each item and found it a place, the cabin began to feel less like an empty structure and more like a home. She also explored her property, walking the land in the early morning when the air was still cool. The 40 acres were more beautiful than she had imagined. Grassland rolled away in gentle swells, dotted with wildflowers. The creek that bordered the south edge ran clear and cold. The barn, when she investigated it, was indeed full of old hay and evidence of mice, but it had a good roof and sturdy walls. She could picture chickens in the small coop attached to the side, maybe a milk cow in one of the stalls. These were dreams for the future, though. Right now, she needed to focus on survival. Her $43 had become $41 after paying Henry, and that would not last long. She needed work, needed income, needed to figure out how to make a living in this new place. On the morning Henry was due to arrive, Victoria changed into her one good black dress, the one she saved for church and important occasions. She pinned her hair up carefully, trying to tame the waves that the dry western air had made more pronounced. She looked at herself in the mirror. Henry had hung and saw a woman who looked more alive than she had in months. The haunted look had not left her eyes, but there was something else there too now. Determination. Hope. Henry arrived exactly when he had said he would, driving a smaller wagon this time, one meant for passengers rather than heavy freight. He wore clean clothes and had clearly shaved that morning, his strong jaw smooth. When he helped Victoria up onto the wagon seat, his hand lingered on hers just a moment longer than necessary. "How have you been settling in?" he asked as they started toward Buffalo. "Very well. The cabin is clean now and everything is unpacked. It is starting to feel like home. I am glad. You have been exploring the property, some. I walked down to the creek yesterday. The water is beautiful. That creek runs through my land too. Good fishing if you are inclined." Victoria had never fished in her life, but she was intrigued by the idea. "Perhaps you could teach me sometime. I would be happy to." Henry glanced at her, taking in the way the sunlight caught in her hair, the soft curve of her cheek. "What is your plan for today in town?" "I want to speak with Mrs. Sullivan about bookkeeping work, and see if there are any other opportunities. I also need to post a letter to my sister in Philadelphia, letting her know I arrived safely. The Mercantile also serves as the post office, so you can do both at once. And if you have time, I will introduce you to some of the other townspeople, help you start getting known. The kindness in his offer made Victoria's throat tight. You have already done so much. I do not want to impose. It is not an imposition. Like I said, it is being neighborly. Besides, and here Henry allowed himself a small smile, I like your company. Victoria felt warmth bloom in her chest. It was too soon for courting, much too soon, but there was no harm in friendship, was there? In enjoying the company of someone who made her feel less alone. I like your company too, she admitted quietly. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and Victoria found herself very aware of every point where her body almost touched Henry's. The wagon seat was not wide, and his shoulder was inches from hers. When the wagon hit a bump and she swayed, his hand came out automatically to steady her, strong and warm through the fabric of her dress. Buffalo was busier than it had been when Victoria arrived. Several wagons lined the main street, and people moved between the buildings with purpose. Henry helped her down in front of the Mercantile, and together they went inside. Mrs. Sullivan proved to be the woman Victoria had briefly met on her first day, a tired-looking blonde in her early 30s with a harried expression. When Henry introduced Victoria and mentioned her bookkeeping skills, Mrs. Sullivan's face lit up. "Oh, thank the Lord," she said. "I have been drowning in paperwork. My husband keeps excellent records when he is here, but he has been gone to Cheyenne for a week now, and I have gotten everything mixed up. If you could help me sort it out, I would pay you." "I would be happy to help," Victoria said. "When would you like me to start?" "Right now, if you are able." "It is all in the back office, just a mess of receipts and ledgers." Victoria looked at Henry, who nodded. "You go ahead. I need to order supplies anyway, so I will be a while. When you are done, come find me." The back office of the Mercantile was indeed a disaster. Papers everywhere, ledgers left open, receipts spilling out of boxes. Victoria took a deep breath, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. This was familiar territory. Thomas had taught her his bookkeeping system, and she had helped him manage the finances of his carpentry business. She knew how to organize chaos into order. 2 hours later, she had sorted every receipt, updated the ledgers, and discovered that Mrs. Sullivan had accidentally charged several customers the wrong prices, both over and under. Victoria made a list of corrections needed, balanced the books, and emerged from the office to find Mrs. Sullivan serving customers. When there was a break, Victoria showed her the work. Mrs. Sullivan looked at the neat columns of numbers with something close to awe. "This is incredible. I have been trying to make sense of this for days. How much do I owe you?" Victoria had not actually discussed payment, and now she hesitated, unsure what was fair. "Whatever you think is reasonable." "How about $2 for today? And if you are willing to come in once a week to help me keep things organized, I will pay you $1 each time." $2 was more than Victoria had expected, and the promise of regular work was even better. "That would be perfect. Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan." "Call me Margaret, and thank you. You have saved my sanity." Victoria posted her letter and then went looking for Henry, finding him talking with a group of men outside the blacksmith shop. When he saw her, he excused himself and came over. "How did it go?" "Very well. She hired me to come in once a week." Victoria could not keep the satisfaction out of her voice. "And she paid me $2 for today." "That is excellent news. See, you are going to do just fine out here." They spent the rest of the afternoon in town, and Henry introduced Victoria to what felt like half the population of Buffalo. The blacksmith, a huge man named Carl with gentle eyes, the school teacher, a stern woman named Miss Hartley who taught the dozen or so children in a one-room schoolhouse, the doctor, a young man fresh from medical school back east who had come west for adventure, the minister of the small church, Reverend Thomas, who invited Victoria to Sunday services. Everyone was curious about the new widow, asking polite questions about where she was from, how she was settling in, whether she needed anything. Victoria could feel them assessing her, trying to figure out if she would be another Eastern woman who fled back home within months, or someone who would put down roots. She tried to project confidence, answering questions honestly, but not revealing too much about her grief or fear. By the time they headed back to her cabin, the sun was lowering in the sky and Victoria was exhausted but also exhilarated. She had done it. She had work. She had met her neighbors. She had begun the process of building a new life. "Thank you for today," she said to Henry as they drove west out of town. "I could not have done any of that without you. You could have, but I am glad I could help make it easier." Henry paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Victoria, I know you are still in mourning and I am not trying to overstep, but I want you to know that I am here as a friend if you need one. This life can be lonely, and I would hate to think of you out there on your property with no one to talk to." Victoria's eyes stung with sudden tears. The loneliness had been the hardest part, even harder than the grief sometimes. To have someone acknowledge it, to offer friendship without expectation, felt like a gift. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "I could use a friend." Henry's answering smile was warm and genuine. "Then consider me your friend, and as your friend, I am going to make sure you have what you need to get through the coming months. Winter is no joke out here and you will need help preparing. I do not want to be a burden. You would not be. I am offering because I want to, not because I have to." They reached her cabin as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Victoria had never seen back east. Henry helped her down from the wagon and walked her to the door, and for a moment they stood there on the porch, not quite ready to say goodbye. "Will you come to town next week for your bookkeeping work?" Henry asked. "Yes, Margaret wants me to come every week." "I will be going in for supplies the day after tomorrow. If you need a ride, you know where to find me," Victoria smiled. "I might take you up on that. I hope you do." Henry tipped his hat and then he was gone, driving away into the gathering darkness. Victoria went inside her cabin and lit a lamp, marveling at how different the space felt now that it was furnished and clean and hers. She prepared a simple dinner and ate at the table Thomas had built, and for the first time since his death, the memory did not bring crushing grief. Instead, she felt grateful. Grateful for the years they had had together, grateful for the skills he had taught her, grateful for the furniture that now made this cabin a home, and she felt something else too, something she was almost afraid to name. Hope, attraction. The possibility that maybe, in time, she could feel more than friendship for the blue-eyed rancher who had been so kind to her. It was much too soon, and Victoria told herself firmly not to read anything into Henry's kindness. He had lost his wife. He understood grief. He was being a good neighbor, nothing more. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Wyoming wilderness, Victoria found herself thinking about Henry's smile, the way his hand had felt on hers, the possibility that friendship might someday become something more. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Victoria went to town every week for her bookkeeping work at the mercantile, and Henry almost always managed to be going the same day, offering her a ride. She began to suspect he was timing his trips to match hers, but she did not mind. The 5-mile ride gave them time to talk, and she found herself looking forward to those conversations more than she wanted to admit. They talked about everything. Henry told her about ranching, about the cattle he raised, and the challenges of managing land in a climate that could swing from drought to flood in a single season. Victoria told him about Philadelphia, about her life before Thomas died, about the culture and society she had left behind. They talked about books they had read, about their families, about their hopes and fears. Victoria learned that Henry had wanted to be a teacher when he was younger, but family obligation had pulled him west. Jake, his brother, was apparently terrible with numbers but gifted with horses, able to gentle the wildest Mustang. Their father had been a hard man but fair, and both brothers still felt the weight of his expectations, even though he had been dead for years. Henry learned that Victoria had one younger sister, Emma, who was still in Philadelphia with their elderly aunt. Victoria had been close to her parents before they died in a typhoid outbreak when she was 20, leaving her and Emma orphaned. Thomas had been her salvation, offering stability and love at a time when her world had collapsed. "Is that why you married him?" Henry asked one day as they drove back from town. Because he offered security, Victoria considered the question honestly. "Partly. I loved him, but it was not the passionate love of novels. It was a quieter thing. He was kind and steady, and he made me feel safe. After my parents died, that mattered more than passion." "Do you regret it?" "No, I think we were good for each other. We had 2 happy years, and I will always be grateful for that. But sometimes I wonder." She trailed off. "Wonder what?" "If I will ever feel that passionate kind of love, the kind that makes you reckless and breathless." Thomas and I were comfortable together, but there was never that spark you read about in poems. Henry was quiet for a long moment. "Catherine and I had that spark. It was intense and all-consuming, and when she died, I thought I would die too. It took me years to understand that maybe that intensity is not always the best foundation for a life together. Maybe quiet and steady has its own value." "Maybe," Victoria agreed. "Or maybe the best relationship has both, the passion and the stability." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Victoria looked away first, her heart pounding. They were straying into dangerous territory, and she was not ready. Not yet. As summer deepened into late August, Henry began helping Victoria prepare for winter, teaching her the skills she would need to survive. He showed her how to chop wood, how to stack it properly so it would stay dry, how to preserve food, though her garden was still just a plan for next year, how to shoot a rifle, though she proved to be a terrible shot, and they both ended up laughing at her attempts. He brought her 3 chickens and a rooster, setting them up in the coop attached to her barn. Victoria named them all, despite Henry's warning that naming livestock was a bad idea, and was delighted when they began producing eggs. Jake came along sometimes on these visits, and Victoria grew fond of him too. He was easier than Henry in some ways, quicker to laugh, less burdened by grief. But it was always Henry her eyes sought out, Henry whose presence made her pulse quicken. One afternoon in early September, Henry and Jake brought over a young heifer, a gentle creature they said would provide milk. "I cannot possibly afford this," Victoria protested, even as she fell in love with the cow's soft brown eyes. "Consider it rent for using your creek to water my cattle," Henry said. "I have been meaning to set up a better arrangement with whoever owned this property. This works for both of us." Victoria suspected this was not true, but she was learning to accept Henry's help with grace rather than constant protest. She named the cow Daisy, and Henry patiently taught her how to milk, his hands guiding hers on the teats, showing her the rhythm and pressure needed. Being that close to him, feeling the warmth of his body behind hers, smelling the scent of soap and leather that clung to him, made Victoria's breath catch. When their hands touched, she felt electricity shoot up her arm. And when she glanced back and found Henry looking at her with an expression that was definitely not just friendly, she had to look away before she did something foolish. After the milking lesson, they sat on her porch drinking water from the well, watching the sun set. Jake had ridden back to their ranch, leaving Henry to make his own way home after checking on a fence line. "You have done well here," Henry said, looking at the neat cabin, the productive chickens, the well-maintained property. "I was worried at first that you might give up and go back east, but you have really made this place yours." "I cannot go back," Victoria said simply. "There is nothing for me there anymore. This is my home now. Even though it is so different from what you knew. Especially because it is different. In Philadelphia, everything reminded me of what I had lost. Here, I get to build something new." Henry turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "Victoria, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to race. "What?" He seemed to struggle for words. "I've come to care for you, as more than a friend. I know it has only been a few months since you arrived, and you are still in mourning, and I do not expect anything from you. But I needed you to know. I think about you all the time. I make excuses to see you. When I am at my ranch, I am thinking about driving over here, and I needed to be honest." Victoria's breath caught. She had suspected, had hoped, but hearing him say it made it real. "Henry, you do not have to say anything. I know it is too soon. I just wanted you to know that when enough time has passed, when you are ready, I would like to court you properly. If you would be open to that." Victoria looked at this good man who had been so kind to her, who had helped her without asking for anything in return, who made her laugh and challenged her mind and made her feel alive in a way she had not felt in years. The truth was, she had already been falling for him, piece by piece, day by day. But she was still wearing black, still officially in mourning, and the thought of moving forward felt like a betrayal of Thomas. "I care for you too," she said finally, softly. "More than I probably should this soon. But Henry, I am not ready. I need more time. I understand, and I will wait, however long it takes." He stood to leave, and Victoria stood with him. They faced each other in the fading light, and Victoria found herself moving closer, drawn by a force she could not name. Henry stayed very still, letting her come to him, and when she was close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, she reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for being patient, for being kind, for being you." Henry's hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his cheek. "You are worth waiting for, Victoria Reynolds." Then he stepped back, breaking the contact, and walked to his horse. Victoria watched him ride away, her hand still tingling from where it had touched his skin, her heart full of emotions she could not quite sort through. That night, she took off her mourning dress for the first time since Thomas died. She could not wear full color yet, was not ready for that, but she found a gray dress in her trunk, one she had packed but not worn. It was a small step, but it felt significant, a sign that she was ready to move forward, however slowly. The following Sunday, Victoria attended church services for the first time since arriving in Buffalo. The church was small, barely big enough for the 50 or so people who attended, but it was well maintained with simple wooden pews and a handsome pulpit. Reverend Thomas gave a sermon about new beginnings that felt aimed directly at Victoria, and afterwards, several women invited her to a quilting circle that met on Thursday afternoons. Victoria accepted, recognizing this as another step toward building a life here. She needed women friends, needed community, needed to become part of the fabric of this town rather than remaining an outsider. She saw Henry at the service, sitting with Jake near the back. Their eyes met across the church, and he gave her a small smile that made her heart flutter. After the service, he came over to greet her, proper and polite in front of the congregation, but his eyes held warmth that was just for her. "Mrs. Reynolds, good to see you in town today. Are you well?" "Very well, thank you, Mr. Turner. And you?" "Just fine. Jake and I were planning to ride out to check the herd this afternoon. We might pass by your property on the way back, if you do not mind. I have been meaning to check that fence line we repaired last month." It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it, but Victoria appreciated that he was maintaining propriety. "Of course. I will be home all afternoon." The quilting circle proved to be exactly what Victoria needed. The women who gathered at Margaret Sullivan's house were friendly and curious, but not prying. There was Martha Crawford, the sheep rancher's wife, a sturdy woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense attitude and a warm laugh. Sarah Halloran, younger and quieter, with 3 small children who played on the floor while she sewed. Miss Hartley, the schoolteacher, precise in her stitching as she was in everything. And several others, creating a small community of women supporting each other. They worked on a quilt for Sarah's new baby, due in December, and as they sewed, they talked about everything from recipes to the latest news from back east to the challenges of frontier living. Victoria found herself relaxing, contributing to the conversation, feeling accepted. "We are so glad you decided to stay," Martha said at one point. "Too many Eastern women arrive and then leave as soon as they realize how hard life is out here, but you seem to have grit." "I did not have much choice," Victoria admitted. "Staying in Philadelphia would have been harder than coming west." "Because of your husband's death?" Sarah asked gently. "Partly. But also because I felt suffocated there, like I was drowning in other people's expectations and pity. Here I can be whoever I want to be." "That is the best thing about the West," Miss Hartley said. "Nobody cares who you were back east. They only care about who you are now and what you contribute to the community." As the afternoon wore on, the conversation inevitably turned to men, specifically the unmarried or widowed men of the area. Several of the women had clearly noticed Henry's attention to Victoria. "Henry Turner is a good man," Martha said, her needle moving steadily through the fabric. "He had a rough time after Catherine died, but he has come out of it well. Runs a solid ranch, takes care of his brother, helps his neighbors. Any woman would be lucky to catch his eye." "I am still in mourning," Victoria said, feeling her cheeks heat. Of course. Nobody is suggesting otherwise. I am just saying, when enough time has passed, you could do a lot worse than Henry Turner." Victoria focused very hard on her stitching and did not reply, but she could feel the knowing looks the women exchanged. Apparently, Henry's interest in her was common knowledge in Buffalo. The months rolled on, and Victoria's life developed a comfortable rhythm. She went to town weekly for her bookkeeping work, attended church on Sundays, joined the quilting circle on Thursdays. She tended her chickens and Daisy the cow, kept her cabin immaculate, and read her way through the small collection of books she had brought from Philadelphia and started borrowing from others. And Henry was there, a constant presence in her life. He stopped by regularly, always with some excuse. Checking fence lines, bringing extra supplies from town, asking advice about bookkeeping for his ranch. They would sit on her porch and talk for hours, and Victoria treasured those conversations more than she wanted to admit. By October, she had stopped wearing mourning black entirely, moving to grays and muted purples. By November, when the first snow fell, she wore a deep blue dress that Henry said matched her eyes. "I did not know you were paying that much attention to my eyes," she teased. "I pay attention to everything about you," Henry said quietly, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. The first major snowstorm hit in late November, dumping 2 feet of snow overnight and trapping Victoria in her cabin for 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, when the storm had passed, she woke to the sound of shoveling and looked out to see Henry clearing a path from her door to the barn. She threw on a coat over her nightgown and rushed out. "Henry, what are you doing?" He looked up, his face red from cold and exertion. "Making sure you can get to your animals. The snow drifted pretty badly. I wanted to check that you were all right. You rode through that storm to check on me." The storm was over. The ride was not that bad. But his lips were blue and his hands were shaking from cold, and Victoria realized he had been out in the brutal cold for hours, worried about her. "Come inside right now and warm up," she ordered. "I will make coffee." She practically dragged him into the cabin, sat him by the fire she had built earlier, and pressed hot coffee into his hands. As feeling returned to his fingers and the color came back to his face, Victoria found herself fighting tears. "You could have frozen to death," she said. "Henry, you cannot take risks like that, not for me. I had to know you were safe." His eyes met hers over the rim of the coffee cup. "Victoria, I would ride through worse than a snowstorm for you." She knelt in front of him, taking his cold hands in hers, chafing them to bring warmth back. "I cannot lose someone else I care about. Do you understand? I cannot. You will not lose me." Henry set down the cup and pulled her closer, his hands framing her face. "Victoria, I love you. I have loved you for months now, and I need you to know that I am not going anywhere." Victoria's breath caught. "Henry, I know it has not been a year yet since your husband died. I know it might be too soon, but I cannot keep pretending this is just friendship. I am in love with you, and I think you might feel the same way about me." Victoria looked into his blue eyes and saw her future there. A future full of love and partnership and building something beautiful together. And she realized that Thomas would not have wanted her to remain alone forever, trapped in grief. He had loved her enough to want her to be happy. "I do feel the same way," she whispered. "I love you too, Henry. I think I have been falling in love with you since the day we met." Henry's smile was radiant, transforming his face. "Really, really. You have been so patient, so kind. You have made me feel alive again. When I am with you, I can imagine a future that is not just survival but actual happiness. Victoria, will you let me court you properly? I want to do this right. I want everyone in Buffalo to know that I am courting you with serious intentions." "Yes," Victoria said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Henry, I would like that very much." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close, and Victoria felt something broken inside her begin to heal. She had loved Thomas and she always would, but that love was part of her past. Henry was her future, and that future suddenly looked bright and full of possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both smiling like fools, Henry said, "I should probably get back to my ranch before Jake sends out a search party, but I will be back tomorrow if the roads are clear. And the day after that, and the day after that, I am going to court you so thoroughly that you will be sick of seeing me." "I could never be sick of seeing you," Victoria said softly. He kissed her forehead, a chaste gesture that nonetheless made her toes curl, and then he left, trudging through the snow to where his horse waited. Victoria watched from the door, her hand pressed to where his lips had touched her skin, feeling happier than she had felt in over a year. True to his word, Henry began a proper courtship. He visited regularly, always chaperoned by Jake or with Victoria's door left open for propriety. He brought her small gifts, a book of poetry from the Mercantile, wildflowers he found growing improbably in a sheltered south-facing slope, a carved wooden bird he had made himself, admitting shyly that he liked to whittle in the evenings. They went on sleigh rides through the snowy landscape, bundled in blankets, talking about everything and nothing. Henry took her to his ranch, showing her the operation, introducing her to the cattle, letting her see the life he had built. It was impressive, the result of years of hard work, and Victoria could picture herself being part of it. Christmas came, and the church held a social where Henry danced with Victoria in front of the entire town, making their courtship officially public. Afterwards, on the ride home, he told her about his plans for the ranch, about the improvements he wanted to make, about the future he was building. "I want to build a bigger house," he said. "The one my father built is fine for Jake and me, but if I am going to have a family someday, I want something better. More rooms, a real kitchen, maybe even a parlor." "That sounds lovely," Victoria said, trying to keep her voice steady. Was he talking about a future with her? It sounded like he was. "Victoria." Henry pulled the sleigh to a stop and turned to face her. "I know we have only been officially courting for a few weeks, but I have known you for months now, and I am sure of what I want. I want you. I want to build that house with you in mind. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to have children with you and grow old together." Victoria's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "Henry, are you? I am not proposing, not yet. It is too soon and I want to do this properly, but I need you to know my intentions. I am courting you because I want to marry you, and I am asking if that is something you might want too." Victoria thought about the life he was describing. Waking up beside him, building a home together, children. Growing old on this beautiful, harsh land. It was everything she wanted and had not dared to hope for. "Yes," she said. "That is absolutely something I want." Henry's kiss was gentle at first, tentative, asking permission. But when Victoria responded, her arms coming up around his neck, it deepened into something more passionate. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "I love you so much," he murmured. "I love you too, so much." Winter deepened, and Victoria discovered that the season she had been dreading was actually beautiful in its own way. The snow transformed the landscape into something magical, and she was never truly isolated because Henry visited constantly. They spent hours by her fireplace, talking and kissing and planning their future. In January, almost exactly a year after Thomas's death, Victoria went to the small cemetery outside of Buffalo, where there was a memorial stone for her husband, even though his body was buried back in Philadelphia. She had finally saved enough to have the stone carved, and it stood now among the other markers, simple but dignified. Henry had offered to come with her, but Victoria had asked to go alone. She needed to say goodbye properly, needed to tell Thomas about the future she was planning without him. She stood in front of the stone for a long time, snow falling gently around her, and talked to Thomas in her head. She told him about Henry, about the love she had found. She asked for his blessing, though she did not truly believe the dead could hear the living. But it felt important anyway, this ritual of closure. "I will always love you," she said aloud. "You saved me when I needed saving, and I will never forget that. But I have to move forward now. I think you would understand. I think you would like Henry. I think you would be happy for me." The wind picked up, swirling snow around her, and Victoria chose to believe it was Thomas giving her his blessing. She left the cemetery feeling lighter, freer, ready to fully embrace her future. In February, on a bitter cold evening when Victoria was having dinner at the Turner Ranch, Henry got down on one knee in front of her, Jake, and the fireplace, and pulled out a simple gold ring. "Victoria Reynolds, you have made me happier than I ever thought I could be again. You have brought light and laughter back into my life. I want to spend the rest of my days making you as happy as you make me. Will you marry me?" Victoria was crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." Henry slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Jake whooped and clapped, and then discreetly disappeared outside to give them privacy. Henry pulled Victoria into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, and she kissed him back with all the love and passion she had been holding back. "When?" she asked breathlessly when they finally broke apart. "As soon as possible. Spring, maybe. I know we should probably wait longer, but I do not want to. I want you to be my wife. I want to start our life together. Spring sounds perfect." They were married in April of 1883, just over a year after Victoria had arrived in Buffalo. The wedding was held in the small church, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Victoria wore a dress she had sewn herself, a beautiful cream-colored silk that Martha and the other women of the quilting circle had helped her embellish with delicate embroidery. Jake stood as Henry's best man, and Margaret Sullivan stood with Victoria. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony, and when he pronounced them husband and wife and Henry kissed her, the church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the church social hall, with food brought by every family in attendance. There was music and dancing and laughter, and Victoria felt embraced by this community that had become hers. These people were her family now, and this harsh, beautiful land was her home. As the sun set, Henry and Victoria rode back to his ranch, which was now her ranch too. Henry had added a new bedroom to the house, renovating extensively to make space for his new wife. It was not the grand house he had talked about building eventually, but it was theirs, and it was perfect. That night, in their marriage bed, Henry and Victoria came together with a passion and tenderness that took Victoria's breath away. She had loved Thomas, but Henry was right that there was a difference between comfortable love and passionate love. What she felt for Henry was all-consuming, intense, the kind of love that made her grateful to be alive. "I love you, Mrs. Turner," Henry murmured against her skin. "I love you too, Mr. Turner, so very much." Life fell into a new rhythm after the wedding. Victoria split her time between maintaining her old cabin, which they decided to keep as a guest house or storage, and running the Turner Ranch with Henry and Jake. She continued her weekly bookkeeping work in town, both because they could use the money and because she enjoyed it. She learned ranching, proving to have a natural talent for managing the business side of the operation. She set up a proper accounting system, negotiated better prices with buyers, and generally made the ranch more profitable. Henry and Jake were both impressed and grateful, joking that they should have married an educated Eastern woman years ago. "You are stuck with me now," Victoria told Jake one afternoon as they worked on fence repairs together. Henry was out with the herd and Jake had been teaching Victoria the basics of ranch maintenance. "I am glad," Jake said seriously. "You are good for my brother. I have not seen him this happy since before Catherine died. Actually, I do not think he was ever this happy, even with Catherine. They had passion, but they fought a lot. You two actually seem to like each other." "We do. He is my best friend and my love. I feel very lucky." By summer, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She told Henry one evening after dinner, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing and whooping, and then immediately set her down again, worried he might hurt the baby. "We are going to have a child," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Victoria, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" She asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "I am happier than I have ever been in my entire life." The pregnancy was easy, and Victoria remained active throughout, much to Henry's constant worry. She continued her bookkeeping work until she was too large to comfortably ride into town, and she helped with ranch chores right up until the day her labor started in February of 1884. The birth was long and difficult, attended by Dr. Harrison from town and several of the women from the quilting circle. For several terrifying hours, Henry paced outside the bedroom, remembering Catherine's death, praying harder than he had ever prayed that history would not repeat itself. But Victoria was strong, and when the baby finally arrived, her cry was loud and healthy. Margaret came out to the main room where Henry and Jake were waiting, a huge smile on her face. "You have a son, and Victoria is fine. Tired, but fine." Henry nearly collapsed with relief. A son. Victoria was fine. Everything was fine. He rushed into the bedroom to find Victoria propped up on pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. When she looked up and saw him, her smile was radiant. "Meet your son, Henry." Henry approached slowly, reverently, and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. His son. His and Victoria's son. The baby had dark hair like Victoria, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they were blue like Henry's. "He is perfect," Henry whispered. "You are perfect." "Thank you, Victoria. Thank you for this gift." "What should we name him?" Victoria asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son's face, Henry knew exactly what felt right. "How about James, after my father, but we could call him Jamie." "Jamie Turner." "I love it." The first years of Jamie's life were busy and full. Henry began building the larger house he had talked about, working on it in his spare time with Jake's help. Victoria managed the ranch books and took care of Jamie, who proved to be a happy, easy baby who grew into a curious, energetic toddler. In 1886, Victoria became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Henry's mother. Sarah was quieter than Jamie, more observant, with her mother's hazel eyes, and a temperament that even as a baby seemed thoughtful. The new house was finished in 1887, a sprawling structure with 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen with a cookstove, a parlor, and even an indoor bathroom with running water that was piped from a spring uphill. It was the finest house in the area, and Victoria furnished it with some of the furniture from her cabin, mixing Thomas's craftsmanship with new pieces Henry built in his workshop. Jake married in 1888, bringing home a mail-order bride named Ellen from Colorado who turned out to be perfect for him. They built a smaller house on the ranch property, and Ellen and Victoria became close friends. The Turner Ranch prospered, growing larger and more successful each year. In 1889, Victoria gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Thomas and Catherine, honoring the spouses they had lost. Henry said it felt right, acknowledging the people who had brought them to this point, who would always be part of their history. Buffalo grew too, transforming from a rough frontier town into a real community with a proper school, a library, and eventually even a railroad depot. Victoria's little bookkeeping business grew as well, and she eventually took on an apprentice, a young woman named Lucy who showed real aptitude for numbers. The years passed in a blur of work and love and family. Jamie grew into a serious young man who loved ranching and eventually took over much of the day-to-day operation. Sarah showed artistic talent and spent hours drawing the landscape and animals. The twins were wild and adventurous, constantly getting into trouble and making their parents laugh. Victoria's sister, Emma, came to visit in 1892 and loved Wyoming so much she decided to stay, eventually marrying the schoolteacher's son and settling in Buffalo. Having family nearby made Victoria's happiness complete. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, Henry surprised Victoria by taking her on a trip to Cheyenne, leaving the children with Jake and Ellen. It was the first time they had been alone together for more than a few hours since Jamie was born, and they spent 3 days acting like newlyweds, eating at fancy restaurants, attending the theater, and spending long hours in their hotel room. "You ever regret it?" Henry asked one evening as they sat on the hotel balcony watching the sunset. Leaving Philadelphia, giving up city life for ranching. Victoria looked at her husband, still as handsome as the day she met him, though now there was silver at his temples and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. She thought about the scared, grieving widow she had been when she arrived in Buffalo, and the strong, happy woman she had become. "Not for one single second," she said. "Coming west was the best decision I ever made. Finding you was the greatest gift of my life." Henry pulled her into his arms, kissing her with the same passion he had shown on their wedding night. "I love you, Victoria Turner, today, tomorrow, and always." "Always," Victoria agreed. They returned home to Buffalo, to their ranch, to their children, to the life they had built together on the harsh, beautiful Wyoming frontier. And Victoria knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Years continued to pass, and the Turner Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the region. Jamie married at 22, bringing home a rancher's daughter named Mary who fit seamlessly into the family. Sarah surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, taking over when Miss Hartley finally retired. The twins, Thomas and Catherine, eventually struck out on their own, Thomas to start his own ranch and Catherine to marry a lawyer and move to Sheridan. Victoria and Henry grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had 5 grandchildren by 1900, with more on the way. Henry's hair turned completely white, and Victoria's showed silver threads, but they were both healthy and active, still running the ranch together, still finishing each other's sentences, still very much in love. On a warm summer evening in 1905, Victoria sat on the porch of the big house, watching the sun set over the mountains. She was 67 years old now, and Henry was 69. Jamie and his family lived in the original ranch house, and the property was thriving under his management. Sarah visited often with her students, bringing joy and noise. The twins were raising their own families. Henry came out and sat beside her in the rocking chair he had built specifically for this porch, these evenings. He took her hand, their fingers interlacing automatically, a gesture repeated thousands of times over 22 years of marriage. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. How far we have come, how lucky I am." "I am the lucky one. You took a chance on a rough cowboy with a broken heart, and you gave me a life I never dreamed I could have." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. "Do you remember what you said when you first saw me at the train station?" Henry smiled. "I said it looked like you planned to stay forever." "I did. I do. Forever with you is not nearly long enough." "Then we will have to settle for forever and a day," Henry said, kissing the top of her head. They sat together as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. And Victoria thought about the train that had brought her to Buffalo all those years ago. She had arrived a widow with a wagon full of furniture and a heart full of grief, not knowing what the future held. That cowboy had been right. She had planned to stay forever, and forever had turned out to be more beautiful than she ever could have imagined. Their children grew and had children of their own, and those grandchildren had children, and the Turner Ranch remained in the family for generations. But the story really belonged to Victoria and Henry, the widow and the cowboy who had found each other in the Wild West and built a love that lasted a lifetime. They lived to see Wyoming become a state. They lived to see the frontier transform into civilization. They lived to see automobiles replace horses, electricity come to Buffalo, and the world change in ways they never could have predicted. But through it all, they had each other. And on a cold winter night in 1918, when Henry passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, with Victoria holding his hand. He died knowing he had been loved completely and had loved completely in return. Victoria lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories about the old days, about coming west on a train with a wagon full of furniture, about meeting a blue-eyed cowboy who changed her life. She died at 85 in her sleep, in the big house Henry had built for her. And when her children cleaned out her belongings, they found among her treasures the furniture Thomas had made, still beautiful and sturdy after all these years. A rocking chair Henry had carved, letters from her sister, and a journal she had kept, documenting her arrival in Buffalo and the incredible life she had lived. The last entry, dated just a week before her death, reads simply, "I came west looking for a fresh start and found everything I never knew I needed. I found home. I found family. I found love twice in one lifetime, which is more than most people can say. I regret nothing. I would do it all again exactly the same way. This wild, beautiful land gave me everything." The Turner Ranch still stands today, passed down through generations, a testament to the love story of Victoria and Henry, the widow and the cowboy who took a chance on each other and built something that lasted. The cabin where Victoria first lived has been preserved as a family landmark, and inside, carefully maintained, sits the furniture her first husband built, alongside pieces Henry crafted, a reminder that love can come more than once, and that sometimes the journey west is really a journey home. The town of Buffalo, Wyoming still exists too, grown larger but still maintaining the frontier spirit that drew people like Victoria west all those years ago. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blows across the grasslands, locals swear they can see two figures sitting on a porch together, watching the sunset, holding hands, eternal proof that true love never really dies. It just transforms, becoming part of the land, the story, the legend of the Wild West where anything was possible if you were brave enough to reach for it. Victoria reached, and Henry was there to catch her, and together they created a legacy that would outlast them both. Their story became family legend, passed down through the generations, a reminder that life's greatest adventures often begin with endings, that sometimes losing everything means you are finally free to find what you were always meant to have. Victoria lost her first husband but found her greatest love. She left behind everything familiar and discovered a home she never knew existed, and it all started with a train whistle, a wagon full of furniture, and a cowboy who said it looked like she planned to stay forever. She did stay, and forever turned out to be the greatest gift of all.